Hello, my dear friends. Good afternoon. Welcome to our lecture for today. And we are working from home because of some of our circumstances today, because of the weather condition. But I do hope that all of you are doing well and fine despite of this La Nina and these heavy rains that we are experiencing. So today I'm going to discuss and I will be talking about the four philosophical foundations of education. And we will be focusing our attention on the four major schools of thought in education. Although there are many schools of thought, of course, but I would like to focus on these four because I think this is more relevant for our education sector for today. So sit back and listen to our lecture, and later on we will be processing our learning through a series of activity and worksheets. As we begin our lecture this afternoon, I would like you to consider the following questions. First is, in general, what is your philosophy in life? Second, what is your idea about education? Why is it important that children go to school? And third, how do we learn and how should we teach? So, write your answers to these questions in the Google form that I have provided you. And later on, at the end of the lecture, as we process the different contents of this lecture, we will have to revisit, you will have to revisit your answers to these questions. And it will help us appreciate and understand the importance of having a philosophy of education. Our lecture for this afternoon is guided by the following objectives. The general objectives is to analyze the impact of idealism, realism, Marxism, and existentialism on the foundations of education and their relevance in contemporary educational practice. The specific objectives of this lecture is number one, to define and explain the core principles of idealism, realism, Marxism, and existentialism in relation to education. Second, compare and contrast the philosophical foundations, teaching methods, and curriculum emphasis of each philosophy. Third, analyze how this educational philosophy shape pedagogy, curriculum design, and student-teacher relationships. Then fourth, evaluate the strength and limitations of its philosophy in addressing the needs of modern education. And lastly, to apply the philosophical perspective to contemporary educational challenges and propose a real-world educational reforms based on these philosophies, and also develop a critical perspective on how their personal educational philosophy aligns with or diverges from these four major philosophical traditions. Then we also have to understand the role of philosophy in education. Why do we have to be concerned with the philosophy of education? And today, sometimes it's so difficult to appreciate philosophy, but if we do understand and analyze the importance of philosophy of education, it will help us appreciate our profession and the practice of the teaching profession. So the first reason why we say what's the role of philosophy in education, number one is philosophy shapes educational goals, curriculum, teaching methods, and student-teacher relationship. And second, understanding this philosophy will help educators develop a coherent educational approach. So the four philosophical foundations of education is idealism, realism, Marxism, existentialism. And we will focus on the following philosophers who helped shape this school of thought. In idealism, we have Plato, Immanuel Kant, and Friedrich von Hegel. Then for realism, we have Aristotle, Thomas Aquinas, and John Locke. In Marxism, we have Karl Marx, Antonio Gramsci, Sai, and Paulo Freire. And fourth, we have existentialism. We have Jean-Paul Sartre, Friedrich Nietzsche, and Soren Kierkegaard. So let's begin our discussion with idealism. So here are some of the key ideas of idealism. First is that reality is based on ideas and the mind rather than material objects. Second, knowledge is absolute and discovered through reasoning and introspection. And third, education should focus on the development of the intellect, morality, and character. So, in order to explore the school of thought of idealism, let us focus our attention on the different exponents or the philosophers who advanced these ideas and contributed in this field of education. The first is Plato. Plato lived within between 427 to 347 BCE in Greece, and he is one of the major exponents of classical idealism. So here are some of his philosophy of education. And most of the ideas that we found in Plato are found in his book, The Republic. So Plato wrote a very important book called The Republic, wherein he summarized his main ideas about the state, and it includes his thoughts on education and his philosophy. So Plato believed that education is the process of realizing the truth and knowledge which exist in the ideal world beyond the physical realm. So he advanced the theory of form. And he emphasized that rational thought, morality, and the pursuit of absolute truth and education. So in contrast to pragmatism and the constructivist school of thought and education, Plato emphasized that truth is objective and it is permanent, and it is not something that can be changed or can be modified, but rather it is something that can be something which is discoverable. So what is the role of education? So the role of education is to cultivate the philosopher kings. This was discussed in his book, The Republic, because according to Plato, the kings should be philosophers. So kaya ginagamit dito yung term na philosopher king, because doon sa theory ni Plato na ipinaliwanag niya sa kanyang librong The Republic, sinasabi ni Plato na dapat ang mga hari daw ay mga philosopher. Kasi si Plato nabuhay siya noon sa panahon ng mga Greeks, di ba? Yung mga Greeks, meron silang mga city-states, iba-ibang klase ng mga kaharian, and they were the first one to advance the different forms of governing, like pure democracy, dictatorship, aristocracy, etc. Nandun sa lugar nila. And the Greeks were very fond of philosophy. That's why ito si Plato, in advance na yung idea na sabi niya, mas mabuti pa raw na ang maging mga hari ay ang mga philosophers, sapagkat ang mga philosophers daw ay may mas malalim silang pagkaunawa sa kanilang mundo, at sila ay naghahanap ng mga kasagutan sa mga tanong at mga problema ng mga tao. So therefore, according to Plato, ito ang mga tao na magiging mabuting mga leader ng kanilang mga bansa. That's why Plato advanced the idea of philosopher kings in his book, The Republic. In order to achieve this, sabi ni Plato, ang mga kabataan daw should undergo a series of training, and it is the duty of the state to educate the children, and therefore at an early age the state must already filter out the students, the children. So they should be classified into the intelligent, the average, and the low, below IQ sort of groups. That's why sabi ni Plato, yung mga matatalino daw at may mga abilidad na intelektual ay kailangan mag-aral sila hanggang sa sila ay maging mga mature. Samantala naman yung mga kabataan na may talent sa physical o kaya sa martial arts o kaya sa pakikipaglaban o kaya may mga mabubuti, may mga malalakas silang katawan, then they should be turned into soldiers. Then yung mga may mga special na ability naman, like yung mga artisans, mga artists, they should be trained to become artisans. At yung mga medyo mahina ang kanilang intellectual na capability, but they have the physical strength and the ability to work with their hands, then they should be relegated to the tawag doon mga uh, blue collar job. Kaya sabi ni Plato, if all the citizens of the state will perform their particular role and rank in society, then the state will be a happy state. So ito ang theory ni Plato doon sa kanyang The Republic. So ini-envision niya doon ang isang bansa, isang society na matahimik, matiwasay, pero sabi niya nakapremise yun sa idea na ang bawat isa ay pumunta doon sa dapat niyang kalagyan at i-perform niya ang kanyang tungkulin ayon sa kanyang estado sa buhay. Ngayon, itong theory ni Plato was criticized of course by the Marxists. So yung kapanahunan ng mga socialist, halimbawa si Karl Marx, they criticized this idea of Plato kasi si Plato daw ay belongs to the bourgeois class. Kumbaga mayroon siyang discrimination. So taliwas ito doon sa theory ng mga socialist na dapat ang society daw should be classless. It should be a classless society. Kaya sabi ni Plato, at an early age, children daw should be taught the art of music, reading, and also poetry. And children should also be taught how to speak. Kasi may yung mga Greek ay minamaster nila yung the art of extemporaneous speaking. So they train not only how to speak, but they also train even their voice to make their voice more appealing, to make their voice more more intelligible. Okay. So ano ngayon ang role? What is now the role of the teacher if we have to consider the philosophy of Plato? So according to Plato, the teacher is a guide leading students from ignorance to enlightenment. Yan. So from ignorance through enlightenment, or from illusion to true knowledge. Kasi sabi ni Plato, tayo daw when we assume this bodily composition, when we become flesh and blood, we were subjected to ignorance, and ignorance is illusion. So sometimes what we know is actually illusion, and according to Plato, the role of the teacher is to guide the student in order to discover true knowledge. Kaya nga dito si Plato, katulad ni Socrates, ginagamit nila sa kanilang pagtuturo yung tinatawag na Socratic method o yung pagtatanong. Kasi ang Socratic method ay isang uri pamamaraan ito ng pagtuturo na hindi lecture ang ginagamit, kundi ang ginagamit dito ay ang pagtatanong. Dapat ang teacher ay matalino siya. Hindi lang siya matalino, dapat skillful siya sa pagtatanong. Because the purpose of this question and answer is to help the student remember or discover truth from his or her consciousness. Yan, kailangan ma-discover 'yun sa kanyang kaisipan. Kailangan ma-enlighten siya. So kailangan maliwanagan yung kanyang ignorance. Kailangan mawala yung illusion niya para makita niya ang katotohanan. So by question and answer, they are able to process this transition from ignorance to enlightenment. So, ang focus ng curriculum ni Plato ay nandoon sa mathematics, philosophy, dialectics, and ethics. So, very simple lang. So, siguro mapapaisip kayo kung ito ang gagamitin natin na pamantayan siguro we have to go back to the basics. Yan, mathematics. Sabi ni Plato, ang mathematics daw ay isang uri ng it is a field of study na immaterial pero dealing with material things. Kasi the principles in mathematics are beyond matter, metaphysical, pero yung kanyang application is material. Then also philosophy, dialectics, yung dialectics yung pagsasalita, pakikipagtalo, engaging in debate, yan. Then also ethics, because children have to be taught to become virtuous, to become prudent. That's why they have to be educated in ethics. So what then is the implication of this kind of philosophy? So you have the Socratic method. Sinabi ko na kanina, the Socratic method. So education through question and dialogue. Then also a tiered education system where students are placed in different social roles based on their intellectual abilities. Then moral education is essential for leadership and governance. So according to Plato, the philosopher king must also be educated in the moral education because it is essential for leadership and governance. Now, let us go to the early modern period and let us meet with Immanuel Kant. So, si Immanuel Kant is a German philosopher. He came from the state of Prussia. That's a state in Germany at the time. He lived between 1724 to 1804. So, Kant believed that education should develop both reason and moral autonomy. Kasi ito si Immanuel Kant was raised in a religious family, a Protestant, a very puritanic Protestantism. And si Immanuel Kant daw ay isang disiplinadong tao. Yan, napakadisiplinadong tao niya, which is very characteristically a German character. So Kant believed that education should develop both reason and moral autonomy. So knowledge for him is not just passively received, but actively constructed through reason. So pumapasok na dito yung idea na sabi ni Immanuel Kant, kailangan daw na i-construct itong knowledge na ito through reason. Meaning to say, you have to discover knowledge through reasoning, and at the same time you have to make sense out of it, and that is the process of constructing the knowledge. Then education must also focus on freedom and critical thinking and ethical responsibility. Yan. So the key concept in education is kung susuriin natin yung philosophy ni Immanuel Kant, ang key concept niya sa education is number 1 is discipline, necessary to control the raw impulses and prepare students for rational thought. Because sabi ni Immanuel Kant, hindi ka makakapag-isip ng matuwid at hindi magiging maayos ang iyong kaisipan kung wala kang disiplina. That's why we have to practice discipline. Then, second is cultivation, developing knowledge and understanding of the world. So, ang knowledge is not something that we just discover, it is not something that is just imparted, but it is something that we do consciously cultivate and improve our field of knowledge. Then civilization, third, civilization. So teaching students how to engage in society. Yan, sabi ni Immanuel Kant, dapat maturuan din daw ang mga kabataan na mag-engage sa society. And then number 4 is moralization, cultivating ethical responsibility and autonomy. Yan. So, 4 yan. Key concepts in education na i-contribute ni Immanuel Kant. Number 1, review again, discipline. Second, cultivation. Number 3, civilization. And number 4, moralization. So, what is the educational implication? The teacher as a moral guide. So education should shape students into responsible, rational beings, and it is very important that the teacher should not only guide with his words, but rather that the teacher should also be a model that can be seen by the students and become an example of a moral guide. So ethical and critical thinking should also be central in education. So when we say critical thinking, we teach our students to criticize by asking questions, by investigation. Then freedom in learning. Students should develop the ability to think independently rather than blindly follow authority. Okay. So let's go to another philosopher by the name of George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. So si George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel lived between 1770 to 1831, and he is the advocate of absolute idealism. Ito yung kanyang mga philosophy of education. First, Hegel viewed education as the means through which individual realize their place in history and society. Yan. Kaya si Hegel, pareho ni Plato, was also criticized by the communist, by the socialist, because of his tawag nila bourgeois idea. Yan. Kasi sabi ni Hegel, ang bawat isa daw sa atin ay may tamang kalalagyan sa ating lipunan. So, nagkakaroon siya ng tawag na parang classification. Okay. Then, second, he saw education as part of a dialectical process, di ba? That leads to the development of self-consciousness. So, alam natin yung dialectical process, especially if you know the scientific method, di ba? You have the thesis, antithesis, then synthesis. Kumbaga, you have the hypothesis, you have the testing, and you have the conclusion. So, ibig sabihin, parang ganun ang knowledge acquisition ng tao at saka knowledge generation is a process of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, which later on results into something that is good. Okay. So, third, knowledge is shaped by historical and cultural context, and education should align individuals with the development of the human civilization. So, dito pumapasok yung kahalagahan ng tinatawag natin na history. Kaya nga, history should be taught in this way to help individuals to align themselves with the development of the human civilization. So, what are the key concepts in education na na-contribute ni Hegel? Number one is education as a means of self-realization. Students must understand the role in evolution of the human thought and society. Second, dialectical method. Learning occurs through the tensions between conflicting ideas, leading to a higher synthesis. Then third, education and the state. Education should prepare individuals to contribute to society and fulfill their civic duties. So what are the implications of this idea to education? First, history, philosophy, and civic education should be emphasized in the curricula. Then, education is also a social process. It prepares individual for participation in the state and collective society. And third, developmental learning. Knowledge is not static but evolves as students engage in intellectual and social conflict. So, may I invite you now to look into the following chart. So, this is a chart of comparison of the philosophies of Plato, Kant, and Hegel. So, for Plato, the key focus is absolute truth, moral and rational development. For Kant, moral autonomy, freedom, and critical thinking. While for Hegel, dialectical progression, historical consciousness. Now, what is the role of the teacher? For Plato, the teacher is a philosopher guide. While for Kant, the teacher is an ethical guide, a cultivator of reason. While Hegel, the teacher is the facilitator of self-realization. So what are the learning approaches promoted by each of the philosophers? So Plato promote a Socratic method of teaching and also reasoning, while Kant emphasized structured discipline leading to independent thought. Then Hegel, dialectical thinking, and historical analysis. So, ano ang impact nito sa curriculum? Okay, so para kay Plato, Plato gave emphasis on the study of mathematics, philosophy, and ethics. While for Kant, ethics, logic, and critical thinking are given emphasis. While for Hegel, it is history, philosophy, and civic education. So, how does idealism shapes education today? Plato's influence is seen in classical education model emphasizing great books and moral philosophy, while Kant's ideas are reflected in modern education systems that stress critical thinking and ethical responsibility. And Hegel's dialectics are used in contemporary progressive education, particularly in how students analyze history, culture, and philosophy. What is then the implications of idealism to education? First is the emphasis on classical literature, ethics, and great ideas in education. Then, teacher-centered learning. The teacher is a role model guiding students towards truth and moral perfection. Encourages discussion, reasoning, and moral education, or what we call the Socratic methods. And examples of this are humanities-based education and great books curriculum. And today, especially if we will visit the curriculum today, the general education curriculum in the universities today, you will find out that there's an elective subject called the great books. So wherein students are exposed to, they are given the chance to learn from primary readings of important scientists, important philosophers, and important personalities of the past and of the present. And this is a kind of example wherein idealism is reflected in our educational system. So, but the thing is, in idealism, it is always centered on the teacher. The teacher as the source of knowledge, facilitator of knowledge, and at the same time, the role model. So it emphasizes perfection or something of a integrity on the part of the teacher. Now, let us go to the next school of thought, which is realism. This school of thought is dominated by Aristotle, Thomas Aquinas, and John Locke. And some of the key ideas of realism is, first, reality exists independently of the human mind. And second, knowledge is acquired through experience and the senses, or what we call empiricism. And third, education should focus on objective truth, facts, and scientific reasoning. So let us visit and revisit some of the philosophies of these philosophers, Aristotle, Thomas Aquinas, and John Locke. So first is Aristotle. This is the Aristotle belongs to the classical realism, one of the ancient philosophers, and he lived between 384 to 322 BCE. Some of his ideas are the following. Okay, so Aristotle is known to be the father of realism. Aristotle argued that reality consists of objects and processes that exist independently of our thoughts. So, in other words, for Aristotle, truth is something which exists independent of our mind. Even if we do not know it, it exists outside of our thoughts and our ideas. So this is a stark contrast with the philosophy of Plato. And Aristotle, of course, is the student of Plato. But eventually, Aristotle developed a somewhat different philosophy because he was unconvinced of the theory of ideas of Plato. And he developed his own theory called the theory of hylomorphism. The theory of hylomorphism posits that reality is made up of matter and form. So in other words, a particular reality exists because it has matter and form. For example, if I hold in my hand my cell phone, for example, I call this object a cell phone. Why a cell phone? Because it has the form of a cell phone and it functions as a cell phone. So what is the cell phone made of? It is made of the metal and the other chemicals that are combined in order to make up the cell phone. So when I look at my cell phone, a cell phone, then that is the form. So that is what is meant by Aristotle of matter and form. So the cell phone is a cell phone because it has matter and it has form. The form is the thing that makes us think that it is a cell phone. So therefore, when a particular object disintegrates, that object will take another form. So that is the theory of hylomorphism. Now, Aristotle also emphasized the importance of empirical knowledge. For him, truth is discovered through observation and reasoning, which is the inductive method. Kaya itong mga scientific method natin ngayon na inductive ay nagsimula ito kay Aristotle, because Aristotle emphasized the importance of inductive reasoning, collecting facts, collecting information, analyzing them, and piecing them all together and making sense out of this integration. That is for him the empirical knowledge. In other words, for him, knowledge is not something just imagined, but knowledge is something that is backed up by evidence and reality. So, another is the importance of categorization. He introduced logic and classification as the foundation of knowledge. In other words, ideas can be organized into class. Ideas can be organized. A class can be organized into different classes, subclasses, etc. like that. And in fact, FYI, si Aristotle ang pinakaunang biologist kasi he made some classifications of different plants, the different kinds, and even in his legal thoughts, and even in his dissection of ethics, Aristotle made of this categorization as something very unique. Like for example, yung idea natin about natural law, divine law, human law, etc. These are examples of categorization. So natural law, of course, is higher, and human law is subordinate, because it is always expected that human law must conform to natural law. When human law does not conform with natural law, it becomes illegal or it becomes invalid. Yeah, that's the theory of Plato. So in ethics, Plato also Aristotle advocated the idea of the golden mean. So education should cultivate balance and moral and intellectual virtues. So in other words, para kay Plato, dapat balanse daw ang ating mga pananaw, ang ating mga kaisipan, at kailangan iwasan natin yung mga extreme, like for example, extreme left, extreme right. Kasi para sa kanya, hindi raw mabuti sa tao ang maging extreme. Kailangan daw nandoon tayo sa gitna. Kailangan daw na nababalansin natin ang ating mga sarili, na pagtatanto natin kung ano ang mabuti at masama, at nakukuha natin yung mga mabubuting bagay sa bawat idea, and we are able to make sense out of it, combine it, and make a generalization out of it. And yan ang sinasabi ni Aristotle na the golden mean. So ano ang implikasyon ng mga idea ni Plato sa education? First is, curriculum should always emphasize science, mathematics, and observation. Then, he also emphasized experiential learning. So, kumbaga si Plato, dahil nga sa biologist siya, scientist din siya, so he emphasized experiential learning. People should learn with through experience. Kaya halimbawa, pag ikaw ay nagtuturo ng history, nagtuturo ka ng social science, etc., sometimes you bring your student to the field in order to help them experience or observe what is happening on the field. Or if you are a physical scientist or natural scientist, sometimes you allow your students to experiment, to find out, to discover some reality, or come up with a better conclusion in that experimentation in order to validate knowledge. So ano ang role ng teacher para kay Aristotle? The teacher is a guide who helps the student to discover the truth through logical reasoning. Example of this are the modern scientific methods and structure logical argumentation in education. Okay, so let us go to the medieval period. In the medieval period, we encounter Thomas Aquinas. So he lived from 1225 to 1274. And Thomas Aquinas is from Italy. And in fact, according to some of the writers, sinasabi nila na si Thomas Aquinas daw was the one who baptized Aristotle. Baptized hindi sa tunay na baptism kasi hindi naman talaga sila nagkita at saka malayo yung agwat ng panahon nila. Si Aristotle sa ancient times, si Thomas Aquinas sa medieval period. Ang ibig sabihin ng bininyagan ni Thomas Aquinas si Aristotle is that Thomas Aquinas appropriated the theory of Aristotle, the philosophy of Aristotle, in order to help him rationalize Catholic theology. Kumbaga sa panahon na yon ay ipinagbawal ng simbahan ang pagbabasa ng mga libro na sinulat ng mga Greek philosophers because according to the church, these are pagan writings, so therefore they should not be read by Christians. But si Thomas Aquinas, nabuhay siya sa panahon ng, kumbaga, malapit na yung tinatawag na Renaissance period. At nadiscover niya yung mga philosophy ni Aristotle. So ang ginawa ni Aquinas ay pinag-aralan niya at binasa niya ang mga libro ni Aristotle, and he took from the philosophy of Aristotle some ideas na pwede niyang magamit doon sa kanyang paggawa ng systematic philosophy niya na later on tatawagin sa simbahan na scholastic philosophy. Kasi si Thomas Aquinas ang bilang theologian, he was a member of the order of preachers. Yung kanyang central idea doon is that kailangan maintindihan ng tao ang kanilang paniniwala. So para sabi ni Saint Thomas Aquinas, although religious truths are immortal or beyond the comprehension of human being, there is a level also of human understanding. Ibig sabihin, hindi kailangan na tayo ay maging ignorante. Kailangan maintindihan din natin kung paano, and especially, Thomas Aquinas lived at a time that the church was also challenged by heresies. So therefore, yung mga Kristiyano, mga pari, at saka ibang mga prelates, they have to defend the faith through reasoning. Kailangan nilang makipag-reasoning doon sa mga heretics, yung mga hindi naniniwala sa sumasalungat sa katuruan ng simbahan. Kaya ang ginawa ni Thomas Aquinas, kinuha niya yung philosophy ni Aristotle para gamitin ito sa pagpapaliwanag ng mga theological truths. So therefore, the key ideas of Thomas Aquinas is that there is always a synthesis of faith and reason. Aquinas combined Aristotelian realism with Christian theology. So, for him, truth is not only supernatural, but truth is also natural. Meaning to say, it can be discovered through reason, and it is also divine or revealed by God. So, it can be both. Truth is, first of all, it is a divine revelation from God, and at the same time, it can also be discovered by our reason. Yan. So, Thomas Aquinas also emphasized the importance of empirical learning. So, he emphasized the importance of the senses in acquiring knowledge. So, ano ang mga implication ng idea ni Thomas Aquinas? First is curriculum should balance religious, moral, and empirical studies. So, it is a combination of all of this. Kaya, sa panahon natin ngayon, kung kayo ay nakapag-aral sa mga Dominican schools, makikita ninyo itong pananaw nito. So there is a balance between religious, moral, and empirical studies. Then there's also rational thinking and debate. The scholastic method should be encouraged in education. And teachers should guide the students toward both natural and divine truth. So teachers should guide students toward both natural and divine truths. Example, Catholic education system that emphasize logic, ethics, and faith. Yan. So Catholic education system that emphasizes logic, ethics, and faith. Okay. Let's go now to the early modern period. We have here John Locke. Si John Locke ay nabuhay between 1632 to 1704. And John Locke is an English philosopher. And siya yung pinag-ugatan ng ating modern democracy. Yan. So, ang key idea ni John Locke when it comes to education, sa kanya nagsimula itong idea na tabula rasa. The tabula rasa is a Latin word meaning a blank slate. So, para kay John Locke, ang kaisipan daw ng tao is a tabula rasa. The mind of a person is a tabula rasa. And the role of the teacher is to write or to put something in that blank slate. So, John Locke argued that human mind is empty at birth and knowledge is gained only through the process of experience. So, learning also through the senses. So, knowledge is built through sensory input and reflection. So, kumbaga si John Locke, nasa panahon siya ng modern period and na-impluensyahan din siya ng scientific method. That's why he emphasized the importance of sensory input. Hindi lang yung napiperceive natin yung mga bagay sa paligid natin, hindi lang na-aware tayo sa mga nararanasan natin, kundi we should be able to reflect on this. Kasi itong tinatawag natin na reflection is a human character not possessed by animals. Kasi ang ibig sabihin ng reflection, we are able to think, we are able to analyze the process of our own thinking, why we think, and why thinking happens. Okay. So, another emphasis of John Locke is that education as character formation. So, schools should develop both rationality and morality. So, kumbaga, the study of logic, morality, rationality, and then also the study of ethics, because people should be taught how to choose what is good from what is bad. So, what are the implications of this? So, the implication is, of course, number one is there is the student-centered learning. Education should be adapted to individual experiences. Learning should be practical and applied. And then the role of discipline and motivation in shaping character. Example, the Montessori education and constructivist approaches where students learn through experiences. So once again, may I invite you to the table below. This is a comparison of the three realists in education. So Aristotle, Aquinas, and Locke. So the key focus of Aristotle is observation, logic, categorization, while Aquinas focuses on faith and reason, empirical learning, and John Locke focuses on experience-based learning and the tabula rasa. Now, what is the role of the teacher? According to Aristotle, the teacher is a guide in reasoning, while Aquinas, the teacher is a moral and intellectual guide. And third, Locke is, according to him, the teacher is a facilitator of experience. Ano yung kanilang mga learning approaches? For Aristotle, emphasize inductive method, structured learning, while Aquinas emphasize debate, logic, theology, while John Locke emphasized hands-on learning and reflection. So, what are the emphasis on curriculum? For Aristotle, it is science, logic, and ethics, while for Aquinas, it is ethics, theology, and the sciences. And John Locke is practical skills, experiential learning. So, to close the realist school, what is now the relevance of realism in education? Number one, realism shapes modern scientific and empirical learning methods. Second, Aristotle's scientific method is the foundation of today's research. Third, Aquinas' integration of logic and faith is still relevant in religious education. And Locke's experiential approach influences modern progressive educational models. What are the implications for education of rationalism? One, curriculum focuses on mathematics, science, and empirical studies. Second, teacher as a facilitator. Students learn through observation and experimentation. And third, it encourages a real-world application and critical thinking. Example, science-based curriculum, laboratory experiments, and experiential learning. Now, we come to the third school of thought, which is Marxism. We have here Karl Marx, Antonio Gramsci, Paulo Freire. Okay, the key ideas are education is a tool for either maintaining the status quo, oppression, or liberation or emancipation. So, para sa kanila, ang edukasyon daw ay ito ay isang tool. Yan. Either to maintain the status quo, which means oppression, or to promote liberation or emancipation. Second, knowledge is shaped by socio-economic structure and class struggle. So, kumbaga, sa school of thought ng Marxism, siya ay nakakonect doon sa idea na ang knowledge is tied up to society and the economic structures. Then third, education should be a means of social change, promoting critical consciousness and equality. Okay, let us understand the role of Marxism in education. Marxism is a socio-political economic philosophy that analyzes class struggle and power dynamics in society. Education is not neutral. It either serves as a tool for maintaining the status quo or oppression, or as a means of liberating the oppressed. So, critical pedagogy stems from the Marxist principle encouraging students to question and transform their reality. So, the philosophical foundations of Marxism in education, first we have Karl Marx. He lived between 1818 to 1883, and he is from the school of classical Marxism. So, some of his key ideas are education and ideology. Schools function as ideological institutions that reinforce capitalism and class division. And ang base at superstructure nito is that education is part of the superstructure shaped by economic relations. So, para sa kanya, tinitingnan ni Karl Marx yung structure ng society, which is the relationship between the capitalist and the laborers. Yan, kumbaga, the oppressor and the oppressed. Between those who own the means of production and those who do not possess the means of production. So, yan ang structure na nakikita ni Karl Marx. Kaya, sabi ni Karl Marx, kung ang society daw ay ganyan ang structure, ang education daw becomes a tool for oppression. Pero, kung ang education ay liberation, then it will teach the worker to be more responsible and to take responsibility. Okay. So, alienation. Workers and students are alienated when education prepares them only for labor rather than critical thought. Yan, kasi sabi ni Karl Marx, minsan daw ang mga schools ay ini-educate nila ang kanilang mga students to become workers, to become employed, but they do not teach them to be critical. Yan, so the absence of critical thought lead to oppression and the continuance and the resilience of the class division in society. So, education should raise the class consciousness and empower the working class. Yan. So, raise the class consciousness. Kasi sabi nga ni Karl Marx, minsan ang mga workers hindi nila nare-realize yung kanilang sitwasyon. That's why they remain oppressed. That's why para sa kanya yung mga workers daw, laborers should be educated. They should have this class consciousness so that they will be empowered and take upon themselves the political power and the economic power, so that the whole of society will enjoy the surplus of labors and not only the capitalist. So, what is the implication of this kind of thought to education? So, school should not serve capitalist interest but empower students to challenge inequality. Then it also promotes critical thinking over rote learning. So, students must question the system, and history and social sciences should highlight the class struggle. Example, socialist educational models, labor studies in the universities. Now, let's go to Antonio Gramsci. Okay, in 1891 to 1937. So, cultural Marxism and hegemony. Ito ang kanyang school of thought. So, what are the key ideas of Gramsci? Okay, hegemony and education. The ruling class maintains control through cultural hegemony, shaping ideology through education. Then you also have organic intellectuals. The working class needs its own intellectuals to challenge dominant narratives. So the war of position. Change does not only happen through revolution, but also by winning the battle of ideas. So take note, this is the war of position. Change does not only happen through revolution, but also by winning the battle of ideas. So what are the educational implications? Teachers, as agents of social change, they should cultivate critical thinking, not passive acceptance. So education must include alternative perspective to dominant capitalist ideology. And schools should foster democratic participation rather than obedience. Example, media literacy programs that teach students to analyze propaganda. Yan. Media literacy program that teach students to analyze propaganda. Then we have Paulo Freire. That's the critical pedagogy. So his key ideas are banking model of education. So traditional education treats students as empty vessels to be filled with knowledge, passive learning. Then problem posing education. Learning should be dialogical and participatory, where students co-create knowledge. Then conscientization. Education should develop critical awareness to challenge oppression. Then educational implication, dialogue-based learning, students and teachers engage in meaningful discussion. Real-world application, education should be linked to social justice movement. Empowerment and transformation, education should lead to action. So example, community-based education programs that empower marginalized groups. So may I invite you again to the to this table. This is a comparison between the philosophy of Marx, Gramsci, and Freire in education. So Karl Marx, what are their key focus? Karl Marx focused on class struggle, economic oppression, while Antonio Gramsci, cultural hegemony, organic intellectuals. Then for Paulo Freire, liberation, critical pedagogy. So what is the role of the teacher? For Karl Marx, the teacher is a political activist, while for Antonio Gramsci, the teacher is a social critic, while for Paulo Freire, the role of the teacher is that of a dialogue facilitator. So what are the learning approach? For Karl Marx, class consciousness education. Then Antonio Gramsci, challenging dominant ideology. Then problem posing education. Then the fourth column is the curricular emphasis. For Karl Marx, the emphasis is on history, class conflict, economic critique. Then Antonio Gramsci, media literacy, political education, and Paulo Freire, social justice participatory learning. Then the relevance of Marxism in education, first is critical thinking, equity, and social justice are the key themes in modern education. Freire's critical pedagogy is widely used in activist and community-based education. And third, the rise of corporate influence in education makes Marxist critique even more relevant today. So, the implications of Marxism for education are the following. First is critical pedagogy, encouraging students to question power structures. Then, emphasis on social justice, equity, and activism in the curriculum. Student centered problem posing education, the Paulo Freire's model. And an example of this would be teaching history and politics through a critical lens, community based learning. One of the contemporary schools of thought in philosophy today is existentialism. This school of thought was born during and in between the two world wars. And one of the most the famous exponent of this philosophy is Jean-Paul Sartre, a French philosopher, Friedrich Nietzsche, a German philosopher, and Soren Kierkegaard, a Danish philosopher. Although there are also many different kinds of existentialism, but we will focus on these three. The key ideas of this school of thought are first, individual freedom and personal meaning are central to education. Students must define their own values and purpose in life, and emphasis on subjectivity, personal choice, and authentic experiences. Existentialism is a philosophy that emphasizes individual freedom, choice, and responsibility. It emerged as a reaction against rationalism and traditional system, questioning absolute truths in favor of objective meaning. In education, existentialism promotes student autonomy, creativity, and self-discovery. The philosophical foundations of existentialism in education are the following. First, let's look at the philosophy of Soren Kierkegaard. He lived between 1813 to 1855. One of the key ideas of Kierkegaard is that meaning is something personal and derived through individual experience. And he made emphasis on the idea that life and living is a project. So he used a term. Uh, he used a term like the leap of faith. Education encourages students to find their own values, whether religious or secular. Authenticity and passion. The true learning requires deep personal engagement. So the implication of this is that education should be personal and student-centered. Teachers should guide students in discovering their unique purpose, and philosophy and ethics should be integral in the curriculum. Example, reflective writing, journaling, and discussions on personal belief system. Now, we come to Friedrich Nietzsche, 1844 to 1900. He wrote a book entitled Will to Power and Self-Overcoming. And some of his ideas are that education or schools should enforce conformity and limit creativity. This is one of his critic of traditional education. So education should develop independent thinkers who create their own values. Students should strive for self-improvement beyond social norms. So these are two important terms that Nietzsche coined: the will to power and the overman. The will to power is means that education should develop independent thinkers who create their own values, while the overman, students should strive for self-improvement beyond societal norm. So what is the implications of Nietzsche's philosophy? Critical thinking and questioning authority should be encouraged. Then curriculum should challenge students to push beyond intellectual and moral conventions. And education should promote self-expression and individuality. Example of this is open-ended inquiry based on learning and critical debate. Then finally, we have Jean-Paul Sartre. He lived between 1905 to 1980. So radical freedom and responsibility. That is his major work. Some of his key ideas are existence precedes essence. And so sabi niya, existence precedes essence. We are not born with a fixed purpose. We create our own. So radical freedom, students are free to define their own meaning but must take responsibility for their choices. So authentic learning, education must encourage self-exploration and independent thought. So what are the implications of this? So student-centered learning, allowing freedom to choose subjects and learning paths. So teachers as facilitators, not dictators, encouraging discussion and exploration, and emphasizing real-world relevance, connecting lessons to personal and social issues. Example, project-based learning where students define their own goals. So, looking at this table, I have written here a comparison of the three philosophers, Kierkegaard, Nietzsche, and Sartre. So, for Kierkegaard, the key focus in education is personal truth, faith, and authenticity. For Nietzsche, the key focus is the will to power and individuality. For Sartre, the key focus is freedom, responsibility, and self-definition. So, as to the role of the teacher, for Kierkegaard, the teacher is a mentor in self-discovery. While for Nietzsche, the teacher is a challenger of convention. While for Sartre, the teacher is a facilitator of autonomy. Now, some of their learning approaches are, for Kierkegaard, reflective learning, discussion. For Nietzsche, critical thinking and intellectual rebellion. And for Sartre, student-led learning, real-world relevance. So, as far as the curriculum emphasis, for Kierkegaard, the emphasis is on ethics, philosophy, personal development. For Nietzsche, arts, philosophy, creative disciplines. And for Sartre, self-directed studies, open-ended projects. So, the relevance of existentialism in today's education can be summarized in the following. First, modern education is shifting towards existentialist approaches through personalized learning and student autonomy. Encouraging critical thinking and self-expression is essential for lifelong learning. And third, existentialist ideas support inclusive, flexible, and holistic education. So, I have also here comparative table, and I invite you to look at the comparative table of the four philosophies. So, on the focus of education in idealism, it's on intellectual and moral development. For realism, objective reality and scientific truth. For Marxism, social justice, critical consciousness. And for existentialism, personal meaning, self-discovery. Now, what about the role of the teacher? For idealism, the role of the teacher is to guide, to become a role model, a facilitator. For Marxism, an activist, social reformer. For existentialism, encourager, counselor. And the learning approaches are, for idealism, Socratic dialogue, reasoning. Then for realism, empirical learning, experiments. For Marxism, critical pedagogy, problem solving. For existentialism, self-directed learning and exploration. So we come now to the question, which philosophy is most relevant today? So first, education today often blends these philosophies. For example, you have the STEM, the fields emphasizes realism, while humanities encourage existentialism and idealism. So Marxist and critical pedagogy are gaining importance in discussions, especially on questions of equity and social justice in education. And finally, teachers should reflect on their own philosophical stance to develop an effective teaching approach. Now, some questions to ponder. Which of these philosophies best represent your educational belief? How can teachers balance multiple philosophies in their classrooms? And do you think that the current educational system leans more towards realism or idealism? Should education focus more on personal freedom or social responsibility? So I hope that in your own free time, you will be able to answer these questions. And as you answer the questions, please reflect on your own belief and try to analyze and think how this can be made more meaningful in your life. So thank you, my friends, for listening, and I hope to see you again next time around.